Revenge with Karen.
I'm sorry, did you just say someone else is presenting my audit findings? That's the first thing Karen said calmly, like she was asking if the break room still had decaf. But her left eye twitched just enough to betray what was boiling beneath that iron-pressed blouse and brittle smile. The HR head, Paula, the kind of woman who says we're a family while cutting your benefits, didn't blink. She just folded her hands like a smug little mall Buddha and said, decided someone else should present. No eye contact, no gratitude, just that smirk. Like this wasn't the final SOC 2 audit Karen had spent 6 months threading together like a bomb diffuser in Spanx. Like she hadn't skipped Thanksgiving with her sister's kids because a vendor mislabeled a two-factor access point. Like this whole damn company wasn't sitting on a foundation she built out of legal duct tape and caffeine-fueled panic attacks. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't channel her inner Erin Brockovich and slap someone with a binder. She just took a deep breath, reached into her purse, and pulled out two things, her badge and a single ring of keys labeled meticulously in her handwriting. Then she slid them across the table with a grace that could have landed her a role in a heist movie. One quiet clink, and she walked out. That was it. No door slam. No you'll regret this. Just Karen, the compliance officer who'd seen CEOs come and go like seasonal allergies, leaving with the same silent dignity she used to ghostwrite the company's whistleblower policy. Hey, real quick, before we keep going, if you're enjoying this so far, hit that like button and maybe toss us a sub. 95% of folks listen without subscribing, and honestly, it helps us keep digging up these wild stories. All right, back to Karen and the delicious storm about to unfold. That afternoon, the team gathered for the big prep meeting, slides open, talking points rehearsed, coffee mugs full of ambition. But there was a weird tension in the room. The kind you feel when someone accidentally opens a Zoom with their mic hot during a bathroom break. Karen's chair sat empty. Her name was still on the deck. The shared drive folder still had her initials. Even the printer label on the compliance checklist said Karen J. Final, final, truly final, people whispered, but no one asked, because no one wanted to know. That night she came back, not for drama, just to pack. She moved like a ghost with a vendetta. Quiet, methodical. Her framed certificate from the American Compliance Association went into the box. So did the stress ball shaped like a gavel. She didn't touch her desktop, just shut it down properly. No shortcuts deleted. No files sabotaged. She even left her post-it note about the VPN change pin to the monitor. Because Karen wasn't petty. Karen was surgical. HR had assumed she'd resigned. There were no formal termination docs, no follow-up emails, just one passive-aggressive Slack message from Paula. Hope you're taking time for you. Karen didn't respond. She knew what was coming. Knew they'd try to backfill her role with buzzwords and bravado. Knew they'd overlook the landmines she'd carefully disarmed for the past 8 years. What they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that Karen wasn't just a cog. She was the named officer on every major compliance filing tied to their SOC 2 certification. Her name wasn't symbolic. It was binding. Legally, contractually, and most importantly, operationally. Which meant the moment she stepped out of that building, so did their entire safety net. Janitor was the only one who saw her leave. Didn't even look up, just gave a nod, and went back to vacuuming up someone's spilled trail mix under the ficus. That's how Karen exited an 8-year career. No farewell cake, no stolen stapler, just a slow walk through flickering hallway lights and the sound of her own heels echoing like the closing credits of a show nobody appreciated while it was on. She didn't pack much. Box small enough to fit on the passenger seat. One mug that said coffee is my compliance officer, a half-dead succulent named Wallace, and a USB drive she hadn't used since 2018. Everything else she left behind. Not because she forgot, because she wanted them to find it, all of it, every breadcrumb. She didn't delete a single file. No frantic Karen's docs archive, folder dumped into some desktop corner like a digital tombstone. Nope, her system was untouched. Folder structure intact. Passwords changed weekly, just like protocol. Her last act, logging out, cleanly. No forced shutdown, no shady deletions. She even left a sticky note for the intern. Don't forget to check the vendor SOC renewals due 1K. The next morning, no one noticed. Not right away. Her chair was empty, but it was early. People assumed she was in a meeting, grabbing a compliance latte with oat milk and just enough bitterness to taste like policy. until 10:32 a.m. That's when someone finally asked, "Has anyone seen Karen?" A beat, then mild panic. By noon, HR had drafted a vague internal note. Karen James has chosen to step away from her role to pursue new opportunities. We thank her for her service. But here's the thing, they never actually fired her. No formal termination letter, no offboarding checklist, no exit interview, just a half-baked assumption that silence meant surrender. What they didn't grasp was that silence, in Karen's world, wasn't absence. It was leverage. You see, Karen wasn't just doing compliance. She was the compliance. Her name wasn't a formality, it was embedded. Literally. Every SOC document, every internal control at a station, every vendor certification flow chart, digitally signed, time-stamped, traceable. It wasn't just copied on the paperwork. She was the paperwork. Even the user access logs still listed her as the final approver for critical systems, data retention, access provisioning, encryption audits. IT didn't revoke her credentials because no one told them to. She was still in the system, still technically on the books. Still, legally, the named officer tied to the company's SOC 2 covenant. By quietly walking away without triggering any official exit procedure, she left behind a compliance Schrödinger's cat, both there and not there. Alive and missing. Across town, Karen sat on her porch, drinking coffee with too much creamer and just enough spite. She refreshed LinkedIn, watched as the company updated their leadership list. Her photo was gone, but her digital fingerprints were everywhere. And sooner or later, someone was going to realize the keys to the compliance castle were still dangling from the empty hook labeled KJ. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. She felt like a ghost. One who used to hold everything together, and now, unseen, unheard, was about to watch it all fall apart from a lawn chair with a front row seat. Karen hadn't just left. She'd gone missing in plain sight and took the company's credibility with her. It started with a Slack ping at 9:17 a.m. from someone in product. "Hey, does anyone have the SOC binder Karen used last year? We need it for the vendor call." No answer. Then another message from marketing, of all people. "Are we allowed to say we're SOC 2 compliant on the website right now?" By 10 o'clock a.m., it had snowballed into full-scale whispering chaos. Not the dramatic kind where people shout and flip desks. No, this was worse. Kind where nobody knows enough to panic loudly, so they panic quietly. Furtive glances, side-channel slacks, conference room doors clicking shut like trapdoors in a bad escape room. Someone finally told the new guy, the one with the clipboard and unjustified confidence, to grab the SOC audit files from the compliance drive. He walked up to the terminal, punched in his login, clicked into the secure share folder labeled SOC Master Final, and access denied. The intern tried next. Same result. Turns out the drive was encrypted and access controlled with a two-tier key. One admin credential tied to the IT lead. The second, Karen's biometric authorization, which no one had removed. Over in IT Max, the guy who once bragged he could spoof the firewall with a Raspberry Pi and 3 Red Bulls started sweating. They'd been told Karen resigned, that she was out of the loop, so they never offboarded her, never revoked credentials, never reassigned security tokens because nobody told them to. They tried logging into her account, still active, still intact, still connected to every compliance tool that mattered. And then the laptop request came, a polite email from HR, as if asking for a library book back. Subject line, company property return request body. "Hi Karen, hope you're doing well. Can you kindly return the laptop when you have a chance? Thanks again for your service." Karen read it while stirring creamer into her coffee with a nail file. She responded 23 minutes later with a FedEx tracking number and a 3-word message, wiped, per protocol. No greeting, no sign-off, just a fully legal, fully compliant middle finger. Back at the office, they opened the package like it was a cursed amulet. The laptop booted into a login screen, no user profiles. No files, nothing but a clean OS install with default settings, and a text file on the desktop labeled returned per SOP PDF outlining the exact policy language HR themselves had signed off on 2 years prior. Karen followed every rule, every step, and made sure there was no way to claim otherwise. Legal began taking notes. IT stopped making eye contact. By mid-afternoon, Finance discovered they couldn't access the vendor certification spreadsheets. Master list of audit controls. Missing. Not deleted, just inaccessible. Because only 2 people had the key. Karen and someone who hadn't worked there since 2021. Now, the interns were printing out PDFs from cached emails and trying to tape together a paper trail, like a third-grade science fair project. The new compliance guy was overheard Googling what is SOC2 while pretending to understand a vendor call. Char slapped together a fresh org chart and claimed continuity, but even the font looked nervous. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone knew it. They had no idea what Karen actually did. They had her job title on paper, sure. A list of responsibilities crafted by someone in HR who thought controls meant make sure no one microwaves fish. But the reality? Karen was a one-woman firewall between them and regulatory hell. Built their system not out of templates, but her trauma, from every time she had to patch over some VP's shortcut with duct tape made of statutes and blood pressure pills. And now she was gone. Not fired, not replaced, just absent, and the holes were showing. Every document with a red access denied. Every meeting where someone muttered, "Didn't Karen used to handle this?" She had, all of it, but they never asked how. By Wednesday, the new guy, Corey, had convinced himself he was the compliance whisperer. He printed out the COSO framework, skimmed the Wikipedia summary, and started writing what he called a streamlined audit readiness plan, which was basically just 3 pages of bulleted marketing jargon arranged to resemble intelligence. Establish proactive oversight to drive stakeholder alignment through consistent feedback loops. Karen would have laughed if it didn't also make her want to throw her coffee mug through a window. Back at the office, Corey hosted a compliance alignment sync in the war room, his words, not anyone else's. On the whiteboard, he wrote things like data hygiene equals white heavy checkmark and encryption posture equals agile. At no point did he mention evidence logs, access controls, or even what software the company used to manage security exceptions. Meanwhile, HR was busy raiding old folders and Frankensteining together templated documents from their audit prep Google Drive, a digital graveyard of half-finished policies, outdated control maps, and one file literally named SOC2 template final really final v6. Use this one maybe docx. They added fake dates, made up acronyms, and even copy-pasted language from a Salesforce onboarding guide like it was a legal document. Someone actually proposed printing out old email threads and highlighting phrases like "we believe this meets standards" as proof of intent. Then came the prep call. The external audit firm dialed in at 2:00 p.m. sharp, expecting a walkthrough of system-level controls and documentation. Corey opened with a 5-minute monologue about synergizing cross-platform resilience, and for a moment, the auditors just blinked. One of them coughed. Another typed loudly, like she was searching the DSM-5 for whatever condition Corey had. Then the senior auditor leaned forward into the camera and asked the question no one in the room had prepared for. Who's the named officer on record for your current SOC2 controls? Corey looked at HR. HR looked at legal. Legal looked at the ceiling. Well, Corey began, we've adopted a more distributed responsibility matrix to reflect a flatter operational model. So, technically, compliance is a shared accountability framework, right? The auditor cut in. But who signed the attestation last year? Silence. One mouse click echoed through the room like a gunshot. Finally, legal muttered Karen James, but she's transitioned. Did she formally resign? Not exactly. Did the board approve her removal? We're in the process of that. The auditor paused. Okay, let's bookmark that for now. Translation. We'll be digging into this like raccoons in a trash fire. Across town, Karen was on her back porch, watching the company's website update in real time. New headshots, new titles, new captions with words like innovation and transparency that made her want to chew glass. And yet, despite the glossy rebrand, her name was still there on 3 PDFs. Still the author of the latest vendor risk review. Still listed as officer of record under the controls charter. She took a sip of tea and clicked refresh. Still there. He didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. It was like watching a house fire from the curb where she used to park. There's no joy in knowing you were right if the cost was watching your work get repackaged and dumbed down by people who thought control mapping meant buying sticky notes in bulk. They were bluffing, pretending they could glide into audit week with a duct tape checklist and enough buzzwords to make an auditor fall asleep. But she knew that call had planted a seed of doubt. Fisher, and the moment they were asked for signatures, timestamps, or board-approved transitions, it would crack, and that clock, it was ticking. Because due diligence from the acquiring firm was coming. And they didn't care about jargon, they cared about risk. Karen smiled, leaned back in her chair, and whispered, "Tick-tock." The first whispers came from sales, because it's always sales. Someone let it slip during happy hour that a major strategic alignment was in the works. That phrase, like most corporate euphemisms, meant one thing: acquisition. And not just any acquisition, a big one. Rumors said the buyer was a Fortune 500 firm looking to fold them into a broader digital compliance offering. Translation: suit up, scrub the mess, and make everything look 5 stars on the outside, even if the basement was flooding. By Monday morning, panic had teeth. CEO was suddenly popping into departments he hadn't acknowledged since 2019. Legal scheduled quiet reviews of old contracts. Finance triple-checked burn rates and headcount. HR pulled out their transition folder, which mostly consisted of pastel-colored HR PowerPoints and severance templates they hoped they wouldn't need. But the one thing everyone knew: the audit had to be perfect. No delays, no disclaimers, no funny smells. That's when legal opened the old SOC control matrix binder, digitally of course, and saw something that made their paralegal stop mid-sip of her overpriced oat milk latte. Karen's signature on everything. Vendor vetting, Karen, encryption policy acknowledgement. Karen, quarterly access recertification attestation. Karen again, not just mentioned, signed, with timestamps. Audit log trails. Her name wasn't ceremonial, was legally baked into the damn foundation, like rebar in a concrete wall. And here's the kicker: none of those documents had been re-signed. No board-approved replacement officer. No formal delegation of authority filed. Her role wasn't just a linked-in title. It was written into the company's own security charter and board-approved compliance framework, which meant, unless she personally rescinded her authority or the board voted to remove her under compliance protocol, they were standing on a foundation that didn't legally exist anymore. The first call went to voicemail. So did the second. By the third attempt, legal gave up and told HR to handle it. That afternoon, Karen's phone buzzed while she was organizing her spice rack. HR email: "Hey Karen. Hope you're well." Smiling face with smiling eyes. "Quick thing. Just trying to clean up some old paperwork on file. Could you send over a formal resignation and acknowledgement of control transition? Thanks." She stared at the screen for a full 60 seconds. Then she replied with 2 words: "Check the charter." No signature. No emojis. Just the digital equivalent of setting a trap and watching someone walk directly into it wearing clown shoes. Because the charter, the internal security governance charter she wrote, viewed by counsel and approved by the board, had one critical clause most of them forgot. All compliance officer transitions require written board approval, a 14-day notification window, and active handoff acknowledgement by the incumbent officer. Guess what didn't exist? Anything remotely resembling that process. Back at HQ, legal's inbox lit up. HR pinged IT, then backpedaled when they realized Karen's access hadn't been revoked, because doing so without protocol would itself be a violation. Corey tried to draft a new controls doc to retroactively authorize the transition, but every time he edited one of Karen's old spreadsheets, the metadata updated and stamped her name as the last verified author. It was like trying to paint over graffiti with watercolors. Every change just made the cracks show deeper. Meanwhile, the acquiring firm's due diligence team had started requesting pre-audit documentation. Not the glossy stuff, the originals, with logs, dates, approvals. And every time someone pulled a file, Karen's name looked back at them like a silent ghost saying, "Still here." They thought they'd erased her, but she wasn't deleted. She was architected in. The question came at 9:14 a.m. on a Thursday, buried in an otherwise cordial email from the acquiring firm's diligence team. "Please attach your current organizational chart and officer responsibility matrix for compliance and information security." It was a simple ask, standard, routine, but it hit Corey like a brick to the chest. He blinked twice, then opened the outdated org chart saved in the internal wiki, the same one Karen had last updated 6 months ago. Her name was still there, right next to Chief Compliance Officer named. He opened the chart file properties. Last edited by K. James, last modified 164 days ago. He closed it without saving. Then he did the worst thing you can do in any audit-related situation. He panicked. Corey tried to drag and drop a headshot of himself into the org chart, but couldn't figure out how to adjust the formatting. Finally gave up and asked HR to sort it out before lunch. Paula, the HR director, glanced at the request and muttered something about optics before opening a Word doc titled Karen Term Letter V3 Draft. She changed the date at the top to 3 weeks earlier. She replaced draft with final. She hit save. She did not sign it. No digital signature. No wet ink. Just an empty signature line waiting for anyone, to pretend it was real. Then, in a moment of caffeinated overconfidence, Paula forwarded the fake letter to legal with the subject line. Here's Karen's termination doc. Let me know if this works for the audit folder, smiley face included. Because nothing says fraud like a colon parenthesis. Legal, sensing something felt off but too busy to push back, dropped it into the diligence package and sent it along. No chain of custody. No cross-check. Just the legal equivalent of slapping duct tape over a leaking pipe and praying the inspector doesn't notice the mildew. But someone did. The third-party auditor, a woman named Riley who spoke in clipped syllables and logged everything like a courtroom stenographer, flagged it within an hour. Subject: termination letter follow-up body. Document shows no valid signature. You confirm board-approved transition and officer handoff acknowledgement per clause 6.2 in the security charter. Also, please send updated responsibility matrix showing transition of compliance duties. Back at the office, Corey opened the email, turned pale, and walked directly into Paula's office without knocking. She looked up from her second cup of tea. What now? They asked for a signed termination letter and a compliance handoff. So, we sent it. No. Sent this, he said, holding up the printout. It's not signed. And the charter says, don't quote the charter at me, she snapped. Karen ghosted. We had to keep moving, but we didn't remove her legally. Her name's still on the filings, then scrub it. We can't. That's the point. Meanwhile, across town, Karen was watching the wheels wobble from a distance. She knew this was coming. The fake documentation. The half-baked shortcuts. Desperate patch jobs designed by people who thought governance meant fix it in post. She didn't feel angry anymore, not even smug. She felt inevitable, because she'd written that charter clause herself. She knew what Riley would ask for next: the proof of transition, the board minutes, the system access logs showing who actually changed controls. None of it existed. They tried to write her out of history without understanding that she was the system, not a name on a slide, a legal linchpin tied to every single control. And now, their illusion of order was unraveling under the fluorescent lights of a due diligence war room. Because when the signatures didn't match and the handoff wasn't real, the whole thing stopped being a transition and started looking a whole lot like fraud. The boardroom smelled like too much cologne and not enough oxygen. Bottled water lined the table like soldiers. Tray of untouched croissants slowly dried out under the humming LED lights. Everyone was smiling just a little too wide, like hostages trying to blink Morse code. This was it. Final acquisition terms. The buyer's team had flown in the day before and taken over the corner conference suite. The due diligence phase was supposed to close in 48 hours. If nothing went sideways, company would walk into a new valuation tier and a soft landing for most of the execs, including Paula, Corey, and the CEO, Blake. Blake was mid-sentence, something about streamlining compliance frameworks to align with best-in-class protocol, when the Zoom chime interrupted him. It was the audit partner, a man named Doyle, late 50s. Always wore the same navy blazer, looked like the human version of an IRS envelope. Everyone waved awkwardly. Sorry to drop in late, Doyle said, his voice crisp and calm. I just wanted to run through one open item before we proceed. Blake nodded like a game show host. Of course. Anything we can clear up. Doyle held up a sheet of paper to the camera. It was the unsigned termination letter, the fake one, the one Paula had backdated but never finished. The room froze. Doyle tapped the paper with his index finger like a metronome. This is what we received regarding Karen James' departure. However, I don't see a board resolution approving the termination of the named compliance officer, nor do I see any documentation of a formal transition of responsibilities. Paula's smile twitched. Corey went sheet white. Legal inhaled sharply, but said nothing. Blake blinked rapidly, like he was trying to adjust his focus without moving. Doyle continued. Can someone confirm who replaced Miss James in the compliance officer role? I've reviewed your charter, specifically clause 6.2, and it states that named officer transitions require both board approval and handoff documentation. We've found neither. He leaned closer to the webcam. So I'll ask again, who replaced Karen James? Silence. The kind of silence that bends time. Corey opened his mouth, then closed it. Paula shifted in her seat like the chair was made of cacti. The general counsel started scrolling on his iPad like salvation might be hiding in a footnote. Blake finally spoke. We were under the impression she had resigned informally. Doyle's eyebrows barely moved. You were under the impression. We thought, but you filed no amendment. No board approval. No handoff. You continued to present yourselves as compliant, knowing your named officer was inactive. She left suddenly. Paula jumped in. There was no time. That's unfortunate, Doyle said, flat as drywall. Because according to your last SOC 2 attestation, her digital signature is still the most recent verified officer approval on your internal controls. And per your charter, without a legal transition, those approvals are considered active. Blake opened his mouth, then visibly gave up. Doyle glanced to the side, then back at the camera. I'll be making a formal note of this in the audit report. This may impact the status of your compliance standing, and any statements made to third parties about the validity of your certification. The acquiring firm's rep, seated at the far end of the room, leaned into her mic. What does that mean for the deal? Doyle adjusted his tie. It means your house is out of code, and someone tried to sell it anyway. You could hear Paula's bracelet clink as her hands began to shake. One looked at Corey. The room sat in stunned silence, the kind that smells like panic sweat and half-digested croissants. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blake rubbed his temples with both hands like he could massage the consequences out of his forehead. Then Doyle asked, almost casually, who signed this letter, by the way? No one answered. He nodded slowly, then clicked out of the call. The screen went black. Across town, Karen sat cross-legged on her couch, buzzing with push notifications about audit inconsistencies and diligence delays. She muted them all. No expression, no wine glass, no speech. Just her fingers drumming slowly on the coffee table. 1, 2, 3, 4, tick, tock. The fallout began with a whisper, someone muttering into a muted mic, "We may need to disclose this." Then came the dominoes. Doyle, the audit partner, sent a follow-up email just past 7 a.m. the next morning. No pleasantries. No recap. Just the facts. Without documentation confirming the appointment of a new named compliance officer and evidence of a board-approved transition, the existing SOC 2 attestation is considered non-compliant under ICPA guidelines. Please consider this an official red flag notice. It might as well have been a death certificate. The acquiring firm's counsel replied 2 hours later with a single line, "Deal paused pending legal review." By noon, the board had convened in a half-empty conference room, some members remote, some in person, all deeply unamused. The mood wasn't panic. Panic is loud. This was worse. It was clinical, surgical, the sound of money bleeding out of valuation spreadsheets in real time. What's the exposure? One of the investor reps asked, scrolling through legal briefs like he was looking for an eject button. Depends if the regulators view this as intentional misrepresentation or just negligence. Legal replied, best case, we resubmit filings and delay close. Worst case, we lose the audit window and the acquiring firm walks. How many millions? Legal didn't answer. That's when one board member leaned back and asked the question no one wanted to hear out loud. Why wasn't this caught earlier? Everyone turned toward HR. Paula stared at the wood grain in the table like it was suddenly fascinating. Corey tried to shift his chair to blend into the wall. No one answered, because the answer was obvious. They'd been so eager to replace Karen with someone flashier, faster, easier to control, that they never actually replaced her. They just deleted her from the room like a file they thought they didn't need anymore. But now the absence was radioactive. By late afternoon, they were cycling through increasingly desperate strategies. Could they backdate the board minutes? No. Could someone forge a signature with Karen's old credentials? Absolutely not. Could they argue that informal transitions were part of their agile compliance model? A phrase so dumb it caused the general counsel to get up and leave the room. Eventually, someone asked, should we reach out to her? A pause. Then Paula, now visibly cracking, typed out a message. Hi Karen, hope you're well. We're hoping to clarify a few outstanding items related to your former role. Would you be available for a brief call? Karen saw it come through while she was folding laundry. She stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed one sentence. I left when you erased my voice. Now you can explain why. She hit send, tossed the phone onto the bed, and went back to folding. Back at HQ, the message landed like a bomb. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't threatening. It was worse. It was true. Karen hadn't stormed out. She hadn't sabotaged anything, hadn't gone on LinkedIn and posted a 1,000-word manifesto about betrayal and toxic culture. She had simply stepped back and let gravity do what gravity does. No one had asked why she was walking away. No one asked what would happen to the systems she held up like a spine. They were too busy polishing org charts and planting smiles. And now, they were staring at a transaction frozen in legal ice, with millions of dollars, stock options, exit packages, bonuses, all trapped behind one missing signature they couldn't forge, fake, or finesse. Karen hadn't said no. She just stopped saying yes. And that silence, it was costing them everything. They gathered one final time, same boardroom, same breathless hush, but the smell of panic was stronger now. Coffee sat untouched, growing cold in expensive ceramic. Nobody wore jackets anymore. Just rolled up sleeves and stressed sweat. Steaks had rotted from pressure into something much worse, inevitability. The Zoom call opened with a click, and Doyle, impeccably neutral, suit crisp, expression flat, looked into the camera and held up the piece of paper again. The infamous termination letter. No signature. No date from the board. No matching transition record in the system. This document, Doyle began, his voice slow and deliberate, was submitted as evidence of a named compliance officer transition. No one spoke. He tilted the page toward the webcam. It is unsigned and backdated. A beat. This is fraud. The word hit like a blunt instrument. No metaphors, no room for interpretation. It voids your covenant. 3 seats away, the firm's outside counsel exhaled so slowly it looked like deflation. Legal stood, whispered something inaudible, and walked out of the room without collecting his laptop. The door clicked shut behind him. Doyle continued. The named officer, Karen James, is still listed in your internal control logs as the final approver. Her digital signature is the last active one on your SOC 2 audit trail, and there is no record of her formal removal, reassignment, or consent to transition, which means all compliance certifications submitted after her departure are invalid. Retroactively. The CEO, Blake, leaned forward like he might vomit onto the table. His hands trembled on either side of the keyboard, but he said nothing. Then the board chair, who hadn't said a word in 2 days, finally looked up. Did you knowingly withhold a named officer's removal from audit filings? The question didn't have bite. It was just tired, like someone asking how long the car had been smoking before it caught fire. Blake stared at the wall. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His jaw twitched. Doyle glanced to the side. In these findings, we will be filing a formal withdrawal of audit support and a notification to relevant parties. This will include regulators, stakeholders, and the acquiring firm. He didn't wait for acknowledgement, didn't ask for questions. He just reached forward and ended the call. The screen went black. In the silence that followed, no one moved. Paula's face was pale, her fingers clutching a ballpoint pen like it might save her. Corey sat perfectly still. If he didn't blink, maybe no one would notice he existed. The CEO, now fully collapsed into his chair, looked 20 years older than he had that morning. His exit package, gone. Stock bonus, gone. Company reputation, bleeding out in real time. Across town, Karen sat in her living room, laptop balanced on her knees. She watched the meeting end. She'd stayed muted the entire time. Her camera never turned on. She didn't need to. Her signature was already in the system. Her clause already in the charter. Her silence already on the record. She closed the laptop slowly. No celebration, no speech. Just the faint sound of wind through the open window and the ticking of a wall clock that now belonged to no one but her. In the end, Karen hadn't needed revenge. She'd written the truth in ink, code, and clause. And when they tried to erase her, the system remembered. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.